Greetings and welcome to Writers on Writing with your host, Dr. Brenda Greene. Writers on Writing comes to you each week and gives you, our listening audience, an opportunity to hear writers from the African diaspora talk about their work, their lives, and their craft. And I'm very, very pleased to have with me today Ishmael Reed. Ishmael Reed, it's such a pleasure to have you. This has been a long time coming, and I've wanted to interview you for years. And every time I look around, you're doing something new. So I keep thinking, what can I add to the interview? So thank you so much for
Well,
joining.
thank you, Brenda, and thanks for being a very great supporter of our work.
Well, thank you. You're welcome, and you also. So, just for our listening audience, Ishmael Reed is an American poet, novelist, essayist, songwriter, composer, playwright, editor, and publisher, known for his satirical works challenging the American political culture. And he's probably best known for the work, his first work, Mumbo Jumbo, and a novel that's set in 1920s New York. But you may have heard him recently or witnessed or had an opportunity to view his plays. I call Ishmael Reed a Renaissance man because he's written in every genre and he's really known as a famous satirist. He is the author of a number of plays, which include The Slave Who Loved Caviar, which performed here in New York at the Nuyorican Poets Cafe. Get the Last Laugh. I'm not sorry, Get the Last Laugh is how they named it, but The Haunting of Lin-Manuel Miranda. His critiques of Hamilton have been known and are addressed in that play. He's also more recently did the Shine, which I had an opportunity to see. And he is the founder and co-founder of a number of small presses, journals, and organizations. And we can go on and on. And for my listening audience, there's no way we'll be able to discuss this, but I hope that we can learn more about Ishmael Reed, his philosophy, his life, and his major projects. But before we begin, when we talked, you said you had done a tribute to Nikki Giovanni. Nikki Giovanni, who we lost several months ago. And I'd like to play that tribute. Romney sent it to me. And before I play it, I'd just like you to talk about what your relationship was with Nikki Giovanni and what do you view as her impact on the poetry world?
Well, excuse me, I knew Nikki in New York, and attended functions at her house and elsewhere. There's a very famous photo taken by Anthony Barboza, which shows Nikki and Larry Neal, Evelyn Neal, Romare Bearden, and I think Leon Dumas. And in that photo, she wears pigtails. But I remember she's very youthful, a woman, when I met her. And she was one of those writers who introduced literature to thousands of people, just like Ed Bullins did for the theater. And the vehicle was the Soul, which
Yes.
was a television program that Ellis Hazlitt, he was the moderator. And that really got people to look at poetry, which was in a different way. We came from Southern families, and they had their idea of work was with your hands. And a lot of the number of people attribute that to Booker T. Washington's philosophy, because those are the kind of jobs that were available during that period. But I looked at his papers at Hampton, and it seems that he rejected that. He said he was also for the head. And, because he was a serious intellectual, Booker T. Washington. As a matter of fact, I just ran across something. I was looking for some critiques of the past of the media, and found that he had called out 4 or 5 newspapers about their representations of Black people. But anyway, that was philosophy in the South. That because like most of the women, like my mother, were domestic workers. Black women were domestic workers. I think 70% during that period, and so people were the arts were considered a frill, but people like Haku Madhubuti and Nikki and Amiri and some of the people in Black arts changed that all the way around. That writing poetry was required workmanship in the same way that going to a factory and working at any other labor. So I mean, that was a revolution in thinking, and she was part of that. And I think the thing about Nikki was she captured the voice. She and Sonia, Carolyn Rogers, and some others captured the voice of working class people.
Can you hear it?
Yes, I can hear.
Now, when you were writing that or playing that, what were you thinking about as you played that? It's so soulful, melodic. It appears that you were reflecting on many things about Nikki. And when we look at Nikki, we always saw her as a very vibrant, upbeat. But this is more reflective.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think I would have to go to the paranormal to explain my composing. And I know that sounds spooky, but something tells me to go to the piano. So I compose when the spirit hits me, and it's sort of like a meditative, uncanny process for me. And I started composing because we couldn't afford a composer for one of our plays, and I've been studying jazz I don't know, for about 20 years or so, jazz theory, and I kind of got tired of being trapped by these chord progressions that confine jazz musicians so that what you hear all day on jazz stations is like people breaking down chords all day. And it becomes monotonous after a while. And if you're acquainted with the history of jazz, you can hear a lot of cliches. I mean, people have what they've done is they play the masters at half speed and don't notate the stuff, and then so you hear a lot of cliches. I just got weary and exhausted improvising on standards, and so one day I just sat down the piano and just wandered around. And I mean, you can hear that in the piece, which sort of combines of the blues and spirituals.
Yes, it does.
And I wanted to bring out the spiritual side of Nikki, because even though she had a tough, I mean, bold public demeanor, she's very vulnerable.
Very
And
vulnerable.
I've
Right.
seen her. I've seen her at points where she was very vulnerable.
And she loved gospel music.
Oh,
She
absolutely.
took every opportunity she could to play gospel music. That was part of her DNA. So do you often play music when you're composing poetry or writing?
Well, I mean, I've done 2 CDs so far. One was The Hands of Grace, which was done by this company that does classical music called the Reading Group in New York. And I started putting out CDs in 2005 when I got a cancer diagnosis. And I had vowed to, I'm not going to exit without playing bebop. And so, and so it all came together. And David Murray and Chris Planis and Carla Blank and Roger Glenn and all of us got together, and we did a CD called For All We Know, which is still available. And then Grace Wells Bonner, I played all over. I played at Castle in Italy and Budapest and places, in Lagos, 1999. Grace Wells Bonner, the fashion designer, flew me to London, and I played at her fashion show, and that led to some more compositions. And so we did an album called The Hands of Grace, which is still available, uh, with some tunes on that, some of my compositions. I wrote a composition for Lucille Clifton, whom I introduced to Langston Hughes. I knew Lucille in Buffalo. We were
You
good
said
friends.
you introduced her to Langston Hughes?
Yeah,
Oh,
we yeah, that's known. The I introduced her to her husband. His name was Fred Clifton. He and Malcolm X were 2 geniuses that I met in my life. And Lucille and I were in a theater group, and she and I did Raisin in the Sun and some other things together. She had dropped out of Howard University and came back to Buffalo where she lived. And so we had a group together. And she was writing poetry on the
okay.
weekends. And when I went to New York, I took some of her poems to Langston Hughes, and he put her in Poetry of the Negro.
Mhm. But all
And
that time when you were composing and writing, you were not necessarily combining the music and the poetry. You were
uh,
composing and then you were also writing poetry.
I have something coming out called The Jazz Martyrs, where I read a poem that goes on about, I don't know, 40, 50 minutes, uh, arrayed against a composition I wrote. David Murray plays tenor on this. And I've hired what I do is I'm not a great pianist. So what I do is have my works transcribed, and I get somebody like I had Michael Ichanitz, who's a classical pianist. He and I did a thing. Some of it was played on the BBC. But anyway, getting back to Lucille, I composed a piece for Lucille Clifton. That's they play at her landmark house in Maryland. And I maintained a friendship with Sydney. I remember Sydney when she was a child. So Sydney Clifton put it there. So so I composed something for Lucille and for Nikki. They had it very difficult. I think black women writers have a very difficult time. And if you look at, we all grew up to be misogynists, and not only were we instructed to be misogynists by our fathers, but mothers as well.
Do you
That's
think that has changed in the
that's
last?
oh yeah,
Yeah, that's
oh,
changed.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. A lot of us have been wrong, but it was very difficult to depart from toxic masculinity, which and see, my problem with the corporate feminist movement is they single black men out. I'm not. I mean, black men in my novels are not all great. I mean, they're terrible. Some of them are terribly worse than women. But I think what happened was, and Harriet Fraud, writing in Tikkun magazine, said that the feminist movement starts out as integrated and working class, and then it gets co-opted by Gloria Steinem and people like that. And
Right.
so this crowd, this academic and corporate white feminists mostly, and feminists from other groups, ethnic groups, they pile on, they single out black men. We get singled out whether we're men or
So
women.
what do you think? You had a lot of commentary about Alice Walker,
Mhm.
and of course, I'm not sure much with Intisaki Shange, but I know Alice Walker talked about the womanist movement and said she was not singling out black men. She was kept trying to help people to understand the complexity and the reasons that black men behave the way they did. But have your views changed, or do you still believe she was singling black men out?
Well, that's funny how I got into that controversy. I was supposed to go on the Today Show with about my book Reckless Eyeballing, which white feminists hate. But Gwendolyn Brooks gave me an award for that book, and Toni Morrison and Adrienne Kennedy, who had a play on Broadway a couple of years ago, attended the book party. So I mean, there's a split between attitudes that say corporate and academic white feminists have toward me and others. Now, I would say about getting into that controversy, I was supposed to go on the Today Show for my book Reckless Eyeballing, and Brian Gumbel was away. I think he's the one who was going to get me on there. And a couple of women called me up and told me they want to talk about The Color Purple. I said, well, I'll say something what I know a little bit about it, but I want to talk about my book,
Yes. Mhm.
Eyeballing. So I came on, and I was ambushed with a debate by the way I've been set up, and Clarence, what's his name? Clarence Page from the Chicago Tribune, or one of those papers. They supplied me with a debating partner, and so they got around and they asked what I thought about the the Color Purple. I talked about the film. I didn't mention the book because Trudy Harris had criticized the book. I don't know whether you read that in Afro American Review.
Yes.
And she said she got such flack from white feminists that she stopped talking about it. So I said that I don't particularly look at Steven Spielberg as somebody who's going to arbitrate different ethnic groups and gender relations. because he has his own problems being a Jewish male and being critiqued by Jewish feminists who say that Jewish males have almost anti-Semitic attitudes toward them. So they got their own thing, you know. So so I criticized the film based upon trailers I'd seen. I said, I know this thing. I said, this is the kind of movie they used to make in Nazi Germany about ethnic groups, minorities. And boy, oh boy, you know, and I continue that critique that, you know, like David Simon does did a thing called The Deuce or something about black pimps. Well, that's how the Nazi media portrayed Jewish men as pimps, you know, corrupting Aryan women. So I said, why are these guys taking stereotypes, you know, applied to them and bringing that over and recycling that stuff and put that stuff on us? I mean, as you can see, if you look at the Epstein case, Jeffrey Epstein, black guys are amateurs when it comes.
Compared the comparison, right?
They're not good at crime. You know, they're not good at crime. So anyway, so after that, these feminists, after I said I'm like the color purple, which has become like a sacred phenomenon, I think, for some women. I was boycotted down in the University of Louisiana at Baton Rouge by a white feminist led by Emily Toth. And they told me not to come down there. So no, I'm gonna go down there. I went down there. The boycott collapsed because none of them had read my books. So this is what you're up against. It's a very complicated thing. I do not blame Alice Walker, and she's complained about the movie herself, but that gets lost.
Exactly.
She complained about how Spielberg handled that material. And then they brought Harvey Weinstein on. That's like the last thing that movie that came out a couple of years ago. Well, a musical based upon something that Harvey Weinstein had connected to.
Right.
Here's a serial rapist putting money in a movie about black misogyny. So I said, wow, this is really contradictory. Even, I mean, it's just weird. So all these people got in their luck, their Sunday best going to the premiere of this version of The Color Purple. And Weinstein's in prison in his prison clothes, but he's making the money. He still gets 20% of the profits. So it's a very complicated thing. But I mean, the thing about that is that I just wrote an introduction to Terry McMillan's short stories that are coming out by Penguin. It's a Penguin, one of those companies. And I said, you know, at one point, 3 black women on the bestsellers list.
That's right.
Two of them, Toni Morrison, are close from the 1970s. I thought she was on her deathbed when I talked to her last. And she was one of our patrons. Toni Morrison had a very powerful support system, using the power of Random House and Knopf. That was like
to promote black women, yes.
And also, Alice Walker had the support of a powerful constituency headed by Gloria Steinem. Now, Toni Morrison, I don't know if people have read this at the University of Massachusetts Review, her interview by Cecil Brown, where she says, had it not been for Gloria Steinem, nobody would have heard of The Color Purple because she advocated it. And she supported. Terry McMillan came up through the grassroots. That's why I call her the people's.
Yes, she is the people's.
She had none of that support. Terry McMillan was my student at University of California, Berkeley. I was the first one to publish her. And she calls me up. She says, you know, my plan is to go from city to city, bookstore to bookstore, tell these people I'm coming to town, and that's the way I'm going to sell my book. I said, no, you don't do that. I said, here I am being really lofty, saying, you get the publisher to do that. You're not supposed to do that. She did that, and the rest is history.
That's right. She did that. I was running in Kuru managing in Kuru when she came by. Mm-hmm. But just going back to the whole idea, your philosophy, and we're coming to a close for this first part, but your philosophy, I think, is really epitomized in that book, an early book you did about writing is fighting. Mm-hmm. Your book of essays. And you said, I don't have a predictable computerized approach to political and social issues in our society in which you're either for it or against it. Life is much more complex. And I think that has been the story of how you approach all literature in critiquing it, and also what you do in writing it. You show the complexities. So it's not only about stereotyping the Black woman or the Jewish man or the Black man. You're showing how we use stereotypes in literature in general. So,
Well, in Haiti they have a loa of satire called Guide.
well, what?
Guide, Guede, Guide.
UDE. Mhm.
And in Africa, I studied Europe. In Africa, he's called Iku, IKU,
Yes.
the top hat and all, And as a matter of fact, this figure is coming to Miami since the Haitians are there. I've seen the figure in Miami. And his role is to show each man or woman their devil. So I see my task is coming from Guide, not from Jonathan Swift, but Guide. And I want to show each man, myself, I'm very critical of myself in my novels, each woman and each institution, their devil. I see that as my task.
Very, very interesting. So when you look at the people who you came to that philosophy, you came to that yourself, what helped you to come to that understanding with respect to your writing? Because you actually started out, I believe, as more doing journalism, and then you went to the creative route. How did you come to that philosophy, and what has been your writing process?
Well, I think we were looking for I was on the periphery of the Black Arts Movement, even though Amiri says that the Black Arts Movement originates in Umbra, and he said that in Freedom Ways and elsewhere. But I knew very little about Black history until I went to New York and really began to get into it. And what we wanted to do was find an alternative to this academic Anglo thing that we grew up under. And so I went to folklore, came with something called Neo-Hoodism, and then which started out as a tourist excursion. And then I found that what had been hidden from us was that the fact that the African religion survived the slave trade. I mean, Catherine Dunham and Zolan Hurston and some others had found that connection, but we had no experience with that. We had to learn that. I had to learn that in the streets and through research. And then I found that this whole pantheon was open up to me, which I've used in book after book, starting with Yellowback, where I have these Haitian loas, and really studied it and was influenced by painters. And so next year is the 50th anniversary of Flight to Canada, for which I've coined the term neo-slave narrative. And Larry Neal said, well, we have to get rid of all that stuff, in his manifesto, Shine Swam On. He said, we have to find something else other than Faulkner and all this stuff. And it occurred to me that Flight to Canada was influenced by two Black writers. You see, the New York Times and the book reviews, these Anglo overseas, what I call them like Rhodesian used to be, the overseas settler communication thing. They deny a Black literary tradition. People get by saying, well, like Ellison said, I've been influenced by Ernest Hemingway.
Mm-hmm.
James Baldwin said, I've been influenced by William James. We started out in a new direction. So the Flight to Canada was influenced by Henry Bibb, a letter he wrote to his so-called owner, Stratford, I believe his name was, and by William Wells Brown. I was not acquainted with those. Nobody acquainted me with these texts when I was going to school in Buffalo, even though William Wells Brown lived in Buffalo for 9 years. The early Black novelists lived in Buffalo for 9 years. Now they're making a big to-do about it. But I was influenced by those two writers, not Faulkner, not Hemingway, not Henry James, and all those people. So I was following Larry Neal's manifesto in Black Fire.
Well, that's a good place to bring this first part to a close. I just would like you to make, as we come to a close, to just give us a synopsis, or let me say the motivation for your play, Shine.
Yeah, well, I wanted to I wrote Shine because I found 3 generations of Blacks, writers and artists, and even a young Black filmmaker came to my house, got some film out in Hollywood. They never heard of the story. And my acquaintance, my relationship with Native American writers, I've learned that it's easy for them to overwhelm a tradition or to even render a storytelling tradition extinct. Carla Blank and I did an anthology where we printed a ancient Native American story, and the speaker of that language died that year. That could happen to us, and that's what's happening now. They are trying to exterminate Black culture in this country because Black culture is seen as the one that puts the others up to mischief. I mean, it's sort of like the real classical troublemakers, and they feel foolishly that if they could stamp out Black culture, then we can have a real, cozy white nationalist neighborhood, which is a neighborhood, but a country, a civilization, without it being corrupted or contaminated. And it's impossible to do that. This is the crisis that's going on now, is that the Anglo occupation of North America, which is relatively short, is coming to an end. And Black people are seen as the ringleaders in diversity. And woke, which they get all wrong. I compared an essay I'm trying to get published. I compare woke with reefer madness, like a real hysteria about Black culture. And so I see reviving Shine as introducing this legend to a new generation. And I call it the Shine Challenge because I'm inspired, or I'm taking the technique of the hoopers, the tap dancers. They challenge each other. And I hope that in the future generation, writers will continue to enlarge upon what I've done. I've taken 35 lines of Langston Hughes' Shine, which he wrote down in 1965, and I've expanded it to a script. This is how Ulysses, the classic European oral tradition, was set down and expanded upon. And I'm doing a follow-up on some of the other folk tales in my next play.
Thank you so much, Ishmael Reed. Thank you for
Thank
visiting
you.
with us. And you have been listening to Writers on Writing with Dr. Brenda Greene. Please write us at info@centerforblackLiterature.org. This program is paid for by Medgar Evers College Radio. Thank you. Poem for Ishmael Reed. Your writing is like a kaleidoscope, like jazz. You bring in the music of the universe, the music in your head. You mix in the African drums, calabash, the blues. You are the jazz artist, playing out the rhythms, weaving your sounds, a conductor. Each member of the orchestra comes in, knows when to play, and they play until you decide on the instrument that should come in. You have an ability to listen to the rhythms of the universe. You play with words. History is important to you. You help the reader to see the world from different angles. You peer into the body of our culture and examine its many shapes and dimensions. You force America to look at its racism, at its greed, at its exploitation, capturing the world with humor. You turn the world upside down.